The treaty was signed in gold ink, and the gold ink was a lie. Liaison Ren Holloway watched the council seal it from the third tier of the Atrium Concordant, and he did not clap. He was the only human in a chamber built for 9,000 delegates, and he had learned, over 4 years, that humans who clapped at the wrong moment were remembered. So he stood with his hands folded and his face still, and he let the great bell of the weave ring out across the dome, while 10,000 alien voices answered it as one. That was the thing visitors never understood about the concordance. The voices answered as one, not in agreement, in unity. The weave was a shared mind, a lattice of linked thought that ran through every member species like water through a sponge, and when the council voted, it did not count hands. It simply knew. The decision arrived in every skull at once, fully formed, and every delegate felt it as their own idea. There was no dissent in the weave, because dissent could not survive contact with it. To disagree was to be alone, and nothing in the concordance had been alone for 40,000 years. Holloway had spent 4 years learning to lie inside a room full of people who could feel each other think. It had nearly broken him. He was not a brave man. He knew this about himself with the flat certainty of someone who had measured it. When the station shook, he flinched. When voices rose, he wanted to be elsewhere. He had taken the liaison post because it was quiet and far from any front, and because the recruiting officer had promised him he would never see a shot fired. The recruiting officer had not lied. Holloway would not see a shot fired. He would see something much worse. The treaty on the dais bound Earth and the concordance in mutual defense. 41 human worlds, 360 concordance worlds, 1 signature, 1 bell. Earth had asked for it for 9 years. The council had refused for 8 of them and granted it in the 9th, and Holloway had been the man who carried the pen. He should have known. Looking back, in the years he had left, he would always say he should have known. The weave did not grant things. It absorbed them. Down on the floor, the speaker for the council turned its long pale head toward the human tier and found him. Its name was Vorn Sa, and it was the closest thing the concordance had to a single will, a delegate of the lattice species who had carried the weave's voice for 90 years. It raised one limb in what humans had been told was a gesture of welcome. Holloway raised his hand back. He was good at this part. The lie of the open hand. Then the bell rang a second time, and that was wrong, because the bell only rang once. He felt the change before he understood it. Around the dome, 10,000 delegates went still in the same instant, the way a field of grass goes still when the wind dies all at once. The murmur stopped, the light shifted, and in that silence, Holloway understood that the weave had just decided something, and that all 10,000 of them now knew it, and that he was the only mind in the room that did not. Vorn Sa lowered its limb. The concordance, it said, and its voice came from everywhere, because it always did, has reconsidered. Holloway's stomach dropped through the floor. He did not run. There was nowhere to run to. He stood on the third tier with his folded hands and watched the speaker explain, in the calm, flat tone of a creature that felt no guilt, because guilt required a self to feel it, exactly what the concordance had reconsidered. The human worlds were a contaminant. The speaker did not use that word with cruelty. It used it the way a doctor uses a word for a growth. Humans could not be joined to the weave. 4 years of study had proven it. The human mind refused the lattice, walled itself off, kept its secrets even in a room full of shared thought. A species that could not be joined could not be trusted, because a species that could not be joined could lie, and the concordance had not survived 40,000 years by trusting things that could lie. The treaty had not been a gift. It had been a survey. 4 years of liaison work. 4 years of human ships docking at concordance ports under the banner of alliance. 4 years of trust handed over in good faith. The weave had used every hour of it to learn where the human worlds were, how their defenses ran, when their fleets refueled, which of their 41 worlds were soft. The Mutual Defense Treaty had required Earth to share its star charts. Earth had shared them gladly. 3 days ago. The decision is unity, Vorn Sa said. The decision is mercy, A thing that cannot be joined should not be left to suffer apartness. The human worlds will be made quiet. This is already begun. Already begun. Holloway heard those two words and felt the floor of his life give way. He did the arithmetic in the cold, rushing silence of his own walled-off, unjoinable human mind. The Concordance fleet that had left the Hadar shipyards 2 days ago, the one the Council had told Earth was a goodwill flotilla, a parade of friendship to celebrate the treaty. 412 warships. He had filed the report himself. He had wished them safe travels. They were not a parade, they were the knife. And they were already a day past the halfway mark to the human frontier, running silent under the Weave's shared command. 412 hulls that did not need to signal each other because they all thought with one mind, and that mind had already decided that 41 worlds and the people on them would be made quiet. Holloway looked down at the dais, at the gold ink drying on the lie, and he understood that he had carried the pen that killed his own species. He was not a brave man, but there is a thing that happens to a coward when the worst possible thing arrives, a thing braver people never get to learn, and it happened to him then. The fear ran all the way through him and out the other side, and what was left behind it was very cold and very clear. They had not asked him to leave. That was their mistake. In the Weave, a witness was nothing, a single walled-off mind that could be ignored. They had let him stand on the third tier because they could not imagine that anything one isolated creature saw could matter. Holloway turned, quietly, the way a man leaves a room he is not supposed to be in, and he walked toward the diplomatic dock where the courier sloop Greyreach waited with a pilot and a comms officer and enough fuel to reach the relay at Tanis. From the relay, he could reach Earth. From Earth, if there was time, if anyone listened, if the worst had not already happened, he could reach the only thing in the galaxy the Concordance had forgotten to be afraid of. Behind him, the bell did not ring a third time. The Weave did not need to mark his leaving. He was one mind, he was nothing. He reached the Greyreach and he sealed the hatch, and he gave the pilot a heading, and his hands, for once in his life, did not shake. He had a number in his head, and the number would not leave him. 412 ships, running silent, a day past halfway, and on the far side of that, past the frontier, past 41 worlds that did not yet know they were already dying, there was a thing the recruiting officer had told him about once, in a bar, as a joke. A thing Earth kept and did not talk about. A thing the treaties never mentioned, because Earth had wanted the Concordance to keep believing humans were soft. The Ninth Fleet did not appear in any registry. It had no home port that the charts admitted to. It existed for one purpose, and the purpose was written into its standing order in 11 words that Holloway had read once and never forgotten. If a signatory betrays Earth, the Ninth answers, nothing remains. He had thought it was bluster. Every species had a frightening sentence it kept for tourists. Now he sat in the dark of the Greyreach with the lie drying behind him and 41 worlds dying ahead of him, and he prayed to a god he did not believe in that the sentence was not bluster, and that someone, somewhere, would read his message and decide that the time had come to find out. The message reached Earth 11 hours later, and the thing it reached was not a war room. It was a maintenance bay in the dark beyond Neptune, in a station that did not have a name, only a number that the people who worked there never said out loud. The Ninth Fleet did not sit at a dock waiting for war. It sat folded into the cold, 48 ships powered down to a whisper, crews rotating through long sleeps. A force kept the way you keep a loaded weapon in a locked drawer. You did not look at it every day. You did not want to. You wanted to forget it was there. That was the whole point. The woman who read Holloway's message first was a watch officer named Yusuf Adeyemi, and her job, on paper, was to monitor a relay that almost never spoke. She had held it for 6 years. In 6 years, the relay had carried weather data, fuel manifests, and one wrong number from a courier who could not count. It had never once carried the word that came up on her screen now, decoded from Holloway's frantic burst, stripped of his fear, reduced to the flat language the protocol required. Signatory betrayal confirmed. Concordance fleet en route to human frontier, 412 hulls. Treaty was a survey. Intent is extermination of all 41 worlds. Already begun. Adeyemi read it 3 times. Then she did the thing she had been trained to do and had never believed she would do, which was to stop being a watch officer and become the hand that opened the drawer. She keyed the wake. Across the dark station, in 48 cold hulls, something began that the Concordance, in all its 40,000 years of shared thought, had no word for and no way to feel coming. The Ninth Fleet woke. Not in alarm, not in panic. The reactors did not scream to life. They warmed, slow and deliberate, like a man rising from a chair he has been sitting in for a long time, a man who has been waiting, who has always been waiting, for exactly this. The fleet's command ship was the Thresher, and the woman who commanded it was Admiral Cale Brannick, and she had been awake for 3 hours by the time the wake order found her, because she did not sleep well anymore, and had not for years. She read the message at the door of her quarters, still pulling on her jacket, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not curse. She had commanded the Ninth for 9 years. She had run the betrayal scenario in simulation 400 times. She had been to the funerals of people who died in those simulations because the Ninth trained the way it fought, which was without mercy, including to itself. She walked to the bridge of the Thresher, and she stood at its center, and she said one sentence into the fleet net, and 48 crews heard it at once, and it was the only briefing they would get. They signed our names in gold, and then they sent 400 ships to kill our children. We are going to find those ships, and we are going to find the council that sent them. And when we are done, the galaxy is going to spend the next 40,000 years explaining to its young what happens to anyone who betrays Earth. She let one breath pass. Fold in 10 minutes. Ninth Fleet, ahead. There was no cheering. The Ninth did not cheer. Cheering was for people who were afraid and needed the noise. The 48 ships of the Ninth turned their bows toward the human frontier and folded out of the dark beyond Neptune in a single coordinated pulse that left a hole in space, the size of a moon, and the hole closed behind them with a sound that no one heard because there was no one left in that place to hear it. The math, when Brannick ran it on the long table in the Thresher's planning bay, was the kind of math that made younger officers go quiet. The Concordance fleet had a day's head start and a shorter road. It would reach the human frontier before the Ninth could catch it on the way. That was simply true and could not be argued with. The first human world in its path was Cassander's Reach, a frontier colony of 2 million people, farmers and miners and the children of farmers and miners, with a defense grid built to stop pirates and a militia that had never fired on anything larger than a smuggler. 2 million people, 412 warships running under a single mind. The arithmetic of it was not a battle, it was an erasure. Brannick looked at the table for a long time. Her tactical officer, a lean man named Ito Vance, stood across from her and waited, because he had served under her for 9 years, and he knew that when she went quiet like that, she was not freezing. She was deciding which of 2 terrible things to do. "We can't save Cassander's Reach," Vance said, "because someone had to say it. Not on this road. They'll be there before us. 12 hours, maybe less. I know. If we cut to the second fold corridor, we could be at Tanis Relay ahead of them. Defend the second world. Corin's Landing. 6 million people. We trade 2 million to save 6. I know that too." Brannick did not look up from the table. Her finger traced the Concordance fleet's path, the long curve of it bending toward the frontier like a scythe. That's the math the Concordance is counting on. They think we think like them. They think we'll do the cold arithmetic in trade worlds, defend the dense ones, write off the thin ones, because that's what a mind that votes as one would do. The weave does the math, and the math says some worlds are worth more than others, and it acts on the answer. She finally looked up. "We are not going to do the math they expect. We are going to do something the weave cannot model, because the weave has never once in 40,000 years had to understand a force that is willing to be in 2 places at the worst possible cost to itself. Vance frowned. We don't split the ninth. That's doctrine. 48 hulls, one fist. We've said it 10,000 times. And the Concordance has read our doctrine, because Holloway handed it to them in good faith, with the rest of the treaty package. They know we don't split. They are counting on it. Brannick's mouth did something that was not a smile. So we split. The Ninth Fleet split into two on the far side of the Tanis Fold, and it was the single most dangerous thing a human force had done in living memory. And Brannick did it without a vote, because the Ninth did not vote. She took 20 hulls under the thresher on the hard road to Cassander's Reach, the road that should not have been fast enough, riding the reactors past every safe margin in a fold so deep and so reckless that 2 of the 20 ships lost crew to the strain and kept flying anyway because the crews of the Ninth had signed papers that said they would. The other 28, under Vance in the cruiser Black Verdict, ran for Corin's Landing to be there first, and the math that said the Ninth could not reach Cassander's Reach in time was correct. It could not by 20 minutes. So Brannick did not try to reach it in time. She reached it 20 minutes late, and she made the Concordance pay for every one of those 20 minutes for the rest of the war. Here is what the people of Cassander's Reach saw, the ones who survived to tell it, and they told it for the rest of their lives. They saw the sky fill with Concordance ships at dusk, 412 of them sliding into orbit in a silence that was somehow worse than thunder, all moving together, all turning together, a single will wearing 400 bodies. The colony's pirate-grade defense grid lit up and fired, and the Concordance did not even acknowledge it. The shots that should have warned a normal enemy splashed against shields that closed over the gaps without a ripple, because the Weave did not flinch from damage the way separate minds did. It felt the loss of a ship, the way a man feels the loss of a fingernail, an annoyance, a thing that grows back. The first orbital strike fell on the colony's northern hemisphere, and it took the city of Harrogate off the map in 9 seconds, 60,000 people, and the Weave registered it as a task begun. There was no malice in it that anyone could point to. That was the horror the survivors could never explain to people who had not seen it. The thing killing them did not hate them. It had simply decided, by unanimous and instant agreement among 10,000 delegates who all felt it as their own idea, that they should not exist, and now it was making that true with the patience of a tide. The second strike was lining up over the southern continent, over the colony's capital, over 1 million people in a city called New Tarn, when the sky tore open. The survivors all described it the same way. They said the stars went out in a patch overhead, a wound in the dark, and out of the wound came 20 ships that did not look like the Concordance ships at all. The Concordance ships were beautiful, pale and curved and seamless, grown more than built. The human ships were gray, flat gray, ugly gray, gray like a closed fist, all hard angles and exposed gun batteries and no beauty anywhere on them, because the Ninth had not been built to be looked at. It had been built to be the last thing something saw. The lead ship was the largest, and across its scarred gray flank, in letters 10 meters tall that no one on the ground could read, but everyone would learn, was a single word: Thresher. It did not hail the Concordance. The Ninth did not negotiate. Brannick had said exactly one thing she intended to say to the Weave in her entire life, and she had said it already, to her own crews, in the dark beyond Neptune. The Thresher's first salvo crossed the gap to the nearest Concordance warship in less than 2 seconds, and it was not like the colony's defense fire, and the Weave understood this immediately, because the Weave understood everything immediately, all 10,000 minds learning at once. It learned that the human guns did not splash. The human guns went through. The first Concordance hull, a thing the size of a cathedral, came apart in a single white flash, not damaged, not crippled, gone. Ship and crew and the small fragment of the Weave that lived in it simply deleted from the lattice in an instant. And the Weave felt that. For the first time in the entire operation, the Weave felt something, not a fingernail, a finger, then a hand. 20 human ships against 412. The Concordance ran the math in the shared blink of a collective mind, and the math said the humans had committed suicide, 20 against 400, a gesture, a tantrum from a soft species that could not accept its end. The weave was almost right. It had the numbers exactly correct. It had everything correct except the one thing it had spent 4 years failing to learn. The one thing about humans that the survey could not capture because it lived in the part of the human mind that walled itself off and would not be joined. The Ninth Fleet had not come to win a battle against 400 ships. 20 hulls could not win that battle, and Brannick knew it to the decimal. The Ninth had come to hold the sky over New Tarn for as long as it took the colony's evacuation lifters to claw 1 million people up out of the gravity well and into the dark, and to make the price of every minute of that holding so monstrous that the weave, for the first time in 40,000 years, would have to stop and feel the cost. The Thresher drove into the center of the Concordance formation, not around it, through it. 20 gray ships punched into 400 pale ones like a fist into a hive, and the killing began, and it did not look like any battle the Concordance had archived in 40,000 years of shared memory, because the humans did not fight the way a sane species fought. They fought like each one of them was the last one, every gun firing as if it would never fire again, every pilot flying as if the ship did not matter, and only the next 2 seconds mattered. 20 ships that should have been a footnote turning the heart of the Concordance fleet into a furnace. A human destroyer named Coldwater took fire that should have killed it and kept its guns hot for 90 more seconds and killed 3 Concordance cruisers before it died, and even as it died it did not break formation, it did not run, it simply burned forward into the next target and took that one too. The weave felt every loss now. It could not help it. 20 human ships were carving deletions into the lattice faster than it had ever lost ships to anything, and each deletion was a small bright wound in a mind that had not been wounded in 40,000 years. And the wounds were adding up, and for the first time the unanimous instant certainty of the Concordance had a crack running through it, a single thought that no delegate would admit to having felt. What are these things? Above New Tarn the evacuation lifters rose. Fat, slow, ugly ships full of farmers and miners, and the children of farmers and miners. 1 million people climbing out of the well, while 20 gray warships stood between them and the largest fleet the Concordance had ever sent anywhere. And the gray warships did not move, and did not break, and did not fail. Brannick watched the lifter count climb on the Thresher's display. 200,000 clear. 400,000. She watched it the way other people watch a clock. Around her the Thresher shuddered under fire that would have ended any colony ship in the galaxy, and her crew bled and worked and did not stop, and she did not raise her voice, and she did not order a retreat, because the Ninth did not retreat, and she had told them so in the dark beyond Neptune, and they had believed her, and they were right to. 600,000 clear. The weave tried to break off. This was the moment the survivors would argue about for years, the moment the historians of 9 species would study and never fully understand. The Concordance fleet, 400 ships strong, with 20 human hulls bleeding it, tried to disengage from the planet and reform at distance, the safe and rational choice, the choice the math demanded. And it could not, because Brannick had read the weave better than the weave had read humanity. A single mind in 400 bodies turned all 400 bodies together, always, instantly, perfectly. It was the Concordance's greatest strength, and Brannick had spent 9 years thinking about how to make it a noose. When the weave decided to pull back, all 400 ships began to pull back in the same instant, in the same direction, a single coordinated wave, and the Ninth was already inside that wave, already woven through it. And 20 human ships that thought as 20 separate furious minds did the one thing a single mind could never do. They did not all move together. They moved differently. Each human captain made a different choice in the same half-second, and 20 different choices inside the weave's one choice tore the Concordance formation apart from the inside, ships colliding with ships, fire crossing fire, a single will trying to move 400 bodies through a space that 20 unpredictable human ships had filled with 20 kinds of death. 800,000 clear, 1 million. Lifters away, said the Thresher's flight officer, and her voice cracked on it. All of New Tarn is in the dark, Admiral. They're clear. Brannick looked at the burning sky over Cassander's Reach, at the wreck of the Concordance's certainty, at the 20 gray ships of her command bleeding in the heart of 400, and still, somehow, still standing. She had not saved Cassander's reach. Harrogate was gone, 60,000 people were gone. The world below her would carry that scar forever, and so would she. But New Tarn lived, 1,000,000 people lived, because 20 ships had refused the math, and the Weave had learned, at last, what it cost to send 400 ships to kill a human world. Ninth, she said into the net, and across 20 scarred hulls her people heard her. We're not done. We were never going to be done here. She set her hand flat on the table where the long road to the Concordance core still waited, the road to the Atrium Concordant, the road to the Council that had signed her people's names in gold. Form on the thresher, we fold. The 20 ships of her command pulled out of the burning sky together, and the Concordance fleet, what was left of it, did not pursue. It had learned that much at least. It had learned to be afraid. But Brannock was not finished teaching, and the Concordance had 400,000 years of believing it could not be touched, and somewhere on the far side of the dark, in a chamber built for 9,000 delegates, Vorn Sa raised its long pale head and felt for the first time in 90 years a thing it had no word for, a thing that ran cold through 10,000 joined minds at once. It felt the Ninth Fleet decide to come for the Council. On the conquered worlds, the people who could feel the lattice felt the war before any signal reached them, and what they felt was something the Concordance had never let them feel in 40,000 years. They felt the Weave afraid. A clerk named Osa Lin, on the world of Hadar's wheel, had been joined to the Concordance since birth, the way every soul on her world had been, and she had never once in her life had a thought that was only her own. She did not know what privacy was. She did not know what a secret was. When the Council decided, she felt the decision arrive in her skull as her own idea, fully formed, and she had never questioned it because there had been no separate part of her left to do the questioning. This was not slavery as humans understood slavery. It was deeper than that. It was the absence of the very thing that could have noticed it was a cage. When the Ninth killed the first 100 ships at Cassander's reach, Osa Lin felt it. She did not know what it was. No one on Hadar's wheel did. They felt 100 small, bright wounds open in the lattice, 100 deletions too fast to spread thin, and for the first time in their lives a feeling reached them that the Weave had not approved, a feeling that came from outside the unanimous certainty, a feeling that was simply true and could not be voted away. The feeling was fear, and it was the Council's fear, and the Council could not hide it, because the Council was joined to everyone. For 40,000 years the Concordance had ruled by feeling like the only possible answer. Now, for the first time, 360 conquered worlds felt their masters be afraid, and a thing began on those worlds that the Weave had spent 40,000 years making impossible. The conquered began to wonder. Quietly, without words, in the part of themselves that the war had cracked open, 10 trillion souls across 360 worlds felt the unthinkable arrive. If the thing that ruled us can be afraid, then the thing that ruled us can be ended. And if it can be ended, then it was never the only answer. And if it was never the only answer, then what was done to us was a choice, and choices have other shapes, and we were never shown the others. Osa Lin did not have language for any of this. She only knew that on the third day of the war, for the first time in her life, she had a thought she was certain was her own, because the Weave was too busy being afraid to fill the space where her thoughts should have been. The thought was small, and it was simple, and it changed everything. The thought was, I do not want to be made quiet. She did not know that humans had a wall in their minds where they kept the thing the Weave could not read. She did not know that the gray ships in the dark had that wall, and that it was the strongest thing in the galaxy. She only knew that for one moment she had stood inside her own skull alone, the way the gray ship's crews stood inside theirs all the time, and that being alone in there had not been the horror the Weave had always made it feel like. It had been the first free moment of her life. Across 360 worlds, in the cracks the war opened in the lattice, 10 trillion souls had that same small thought, each one alone, each one certain it was the only one. They were wrong. They were all having it together, for the first time without the weave to make them feel it as one. And the Concordance, which had ruled for 40,000 years by making sure no one ever stood alone in their own mind long enough to wonder, began to lose its grip on the conquered at the exact moment it most needed them, because the gray ships had done the one thing the weave had no defense against. They had frightened the master in front of the slaves. The council felt it happening and could not stop it. To reach back into the conquered worlds and crush the wandering would have meant turning the lattice's attention away from the gray ships, and the gray ships were 40 light minutes from the core. The weave was caught between holding its empire of mines and surviving the fleet that was coming to end it, and a single will cannot do two things at once. It chose survival, and in choosing survival it loosened its grip on 360 worlds, and on every one of them the wandering grew. This was the second war, the quiet one, the one fought entirely inside mines, and the gray ships never fired a shot in it and won it completely. By breaking the weave's certainty, the Ninth had handed 10 trillion conquered souls the first doubt of their lives, and doubt, once it exists in a mind that was built to never have it, does not go back into the bottle. Whatever happened to the gray ships at the core, the Concordance had already lost the thing it valued most, which was the unquestioned, unanimous, instant certainty that it was the only answer. The galaxy had a second answer now. It was gray, and it was scarred, and it was coming. 28 light-years away, the other half of the Ninth was already teaching the same lesson, and it was teaching it to a teacher who thought it had already learned. Edo Vance brought the Black Verdict and 27 other gray hulls out of the Tanis fold above Corrin's Landing 4 hours before the Concordance Reserve arrived, and he used those 4 hours the way a hunter uses the time before dawn. He did not fortify the planet. He did not array his ships in a wall and wait to be hit, which was what the Weave's archives said a defending force would do, because the Weave had read human doctrine, and human doctrine, on paper, said defend the dense world. Vance had also read human doctrine. He had helped write parts of it, and he knew that the most dangerous thing the Ninth owned was not its guns. It was the gap between what humans wrote down and what humans actually did when the writing stopped mattering. Corrin's Landing had 6 million people and a real defense fleet, 40 system patrol cutters crewed by colonists who had drilled for pirates and woken up that morning to learn that their oldest ally had become the thing the drills were for. They were not the Ninth. They were farmers with guns. But they were 6 million people's worth of farmers with guns, and Vance did not write them off the way the Weave would have. He folded them into his plan, every cutter, every militia pilot, and he gave them one job that they could actually do, which was to be loud. When the Concordance Reserve came out of fold above Corrin's Landing, 91 warships strong, it found exactly what its archives predicted. It found a human defensive fleet arrayed above the dense world, broadcasting defiance, lit up and ready, 40 cutters and a cluster of gray hulls holding the high orbit. The Weave ran the engagement in the shared instant it always did, and the math came back clean. 91 against a defending force this size was not a battle. It was a schedule. The Weave committed. All 91 ships drove for the planet together, one will, one wave, the way they always did, and they fired on the human fleet above Corrin's Landing. And the human fleet above Corrin's Landing fought back hard and bright and exactly as expected. And it was a decoy. The cutters were real, the militia were real and brave, and some of them died being brave. But the gray hulls holding orbit beside them were not the Black Verdict, and they were not the heart of Vance's command. They were 8 of his 28 ships, the ones he could afford to make visible, fighting a holding action so loud and so convincing that the Weave's whole attention bent toward it. 91 ships committed to a planet, formation locked, single mind focused on the bright, obvious threat in front of it. Vance had taken the other 20 gray hulls and folded them, 4 hours earlier, to a point in the dark behind the Concordance Reserve's only line of retreat. He had not defended Corrin's Landing. He had set a door in front of it and a wall behind it, and he had let the Weave walk all the way into the room before he closed both. When the 20 hulls of the Black Verdict's strike group came out of the dark behind the Concordance Reserve, The weave understood in the same instant. All 91 of its bodies understood everything, which meant it understood far too late. It was committed to the planet. Its formation was locked forward, and now there were 20 gray ships on its blind flank, already firing, already inside the range where human guns went through instead of splashing. The weave tried to turn. 91 ships began to turn together in the same instant, because that was the only way the weave knew how to move, and Vance had built his entire trap on that single fact. A force that turns as one cannot turn as 20. When the Concordance Reserve pivoted to face the new threat, it pivoted into the holding force it had been fighting, and the 8 loud gray hulls and 40 militia cutters that the weave had written off as a schedule stopped being a decoy and became a second blade, and 91 Concordance warships found themselves caught between 2 human forces in a closing vice. Their single perfect coordination turned into a single perfect trap. It took 19 minutes. The weave fought all 19, because the weave did not panic and did not break and did not flee, which were 3 things the Concordance had always counted as virtues, and which, against the 9th, became 3 ways to die in good order. A separate-minded enemy would have scattered, and scattered, some would have lived. The weave held formation to the end, because holding formation was its nature, and the 9th killed it in formation, one bright deletion at a time, 91 ships becoming wreckage in 19 minutes, while 6 million people on Corran's Landing watched the sky and did not lose a single soul. 11 Concordance ships survived, and they survived because Vance let them. He did not let them go out of mercy. He let them go because he wanted the weave to feel them come home. He wanted 11 crippled ships limping back into the lattice, carrying the memory of 19 minutes, 11 wounds dragging themselves into a mind that had not been wounded in 40,000 years, so that the entire Concordance would have to feel, from the inside, what had happened at Corran's Landing. The 11 ships folded out, and Vance let them, and he turned the black verdict toward the rendezvous where the Thresher would meet him, and he sent Brannick 3 words across the long dark. Corran's Landing holds. On the Thresher, 4 hours and 20 light-years away, Brannick read those 3 words and let out a breath she had been holding since the dark beyond Neptune. Then she turned to the long planning table, and the 2 halves of the 9th folded toward each other across the gap. 46 ships now, 2 lost at Cassandra's reach in the deep fold, and she reformed her fist. 46 gray hulls, and ahead of them, no longer scattered across 2 fronts, no longer split by the weave's clever survey-driven assumptions, lay the one road the Concordance had never imagined a human fleet would take. The road to the core, the road to the Atrium Concordant, the road to the Council itself. The weave knew they were coming now. This was the thing that made the last leg of the war different from anything in the Concordance's long memory. For 40,000 years the Council had decided, and the decision had simply been true, instantly and everywhere, and nothing had ever threatened the place where the deciding happened. The core was not defended the way a border was defended. It had never needed to be. The idea of a force reaching the Atrium Concordant was not in the weave's archives because it had never once been possible. It was possible now, and the weave could feel it becoming possible, and for the first time in 40,000 years, the Concordance did something it had no precedent for. It became afraid in a way it could not hide from itself, because every one of its 10,000 joined minds felt the same fear at the same instant, and there was no separate mind anywhere in the lattice to say it was being foolish. The fear was unanimous. The fear was the decision now. And a collective mind that has decided to be afraid is a far more dangerous thing than a brave one, because it will do anything, anything at all, to make the fear stop. Vorn Sa convened the council in emergency session in the Atrium Concordant. 10,000 delegates joined into one screaming silent will, and it proposed 3 things in the span of a single shared thought. The first was to recall every Concordance fleet in existence, 1,100 warships, and ring them around the core in a shell so deep that nothing could pass. The second was to mine the fold corridors that led to the core, to fill the only roads in with traps that would kill a fleet before it ever arrived. The third was the one that the survivors in later years could never speak of without going quiet, The third was to find Ren Holloway, because the Weave had finally understood how it had failed. It had run the betrayal 100 ways inside its single mind, and it had found the flaw, and the flaw was a man it had dismissed as nothing, a single walled-off mind on a third tier, a witness it had let walk out of the atrium because it could not imagine that one isolated creature mattered. Holloway had carried the message. Holloway had woken the ninth. The whole catastrophe traced back to one human the Weave had been too proud to silence. And the Weave, afraid now and unanimous in its fear, decided that the man who had started this would be the man it used to end it. It still held human prisoners. 100 of them, embassy staff and traders and the families of liaison officers, swept up across concordant space in the hours after the council reconsidered. And the Weave, thinking with the cold clarity of a mind that felt no shame because shame required a self, sent its message out to the incoming human fleet on every band at once, in the plain, flat voice of Vorn Sa. "Turn back," it said, "or we will make them quiet, one each hour, beginning with the liaison Holloway, until the gray ships turn for home." It was, the Weave calculated, a perfect lever. Humans were soft. Humans could not do the cold math. Humans would trade a war for 100 lives because humans could not bear a cost the way a unified mind could bear it. The survey had proven this. The treaty had proven this. A species that would share its star charts in good faith was a species that could be moved by the threat to 100 of its own. The message reached the thresher in the dark between the front and the core, and Brannick read it, and the bridge of the thresher went very still. She did not answer it for a long time, long enough that Vance, on the net from the black verdict, said her name once, quietly. Brannick was looking at the manifest of human prisoners the Weave had so helpfully attached, the 100 names, and she found Holloway's near the top, and she understood that the concordance had captured him on his way home, after he sent the message, before the Grey Reach reached friendly space. He had carried the warning all the way out, and they had taken him on the doorstep, and now they were going to use him as the first knife against the fleet his warning had built. She understood the lever the Weave thought it had. She understood it exactly. And she understood, in a way the Weave never would, that it had reached for the one lever that could not be pulled on the ninth, because the ninth had been built, from its first day in the dark beyond Neptune, by people who had already done the worst math there was to do, and had decided how they would answer it. She keyed the fleet net, and she spoke to 46 crews, and her voice did not shake. "They have 100 of ours, and they are going to start killing them in an hour to make us turn back. I am not going to lie to you about what that means. Some of those 100 are going to die, and we are not going to be able to stop it, and we are going to carry that for the rest of our lives." She paused. "And if we turn back, they kill the 100 anyway, and then they finish the 41 worlds, and then in 100 years, they do it again to someone else, because they will have learned that the lever works. The only way that 100 didn't die for nothing is if we make sure no one in this galaxy ever reaches for that lever again." She set her course for the core. "We do not turn back. We have never turned back. Tell them nothing. Let them learn what their threat bought them when we are standing in the atrium and there is nothing left of the council to surrender." The ninth folded toward the core, into the deepest mind corridor in concordant space, toward a shell of warships ringed around a chamber that had not feared anything in 40,000 years, and behind them, the Weave began its hourly murders, certain to the last that it had finally found the human weakness, and entirely unable to understand the thing that was about to arrive. The recall order brought 1,100 concordance warships toward the core from every corner of the Empire, and Brannick studied their paths on the long table of the thresher and saw that they would not all arrive at once. This was the gift the Weave's own panic gave her. A calm collective mind would have staggered the recall, brought the fleets in waves, timed them to layer the defense. But the Weave was afraid now, unanimously and instantly afraid, and a mind that is afraid does not stagger. It pulls everything home at once, all 1,100 ships racing for the core by the fastest fold each could manage, and the fastest folds were not all the same length, and so the great shell the Weave wanted would not close all at the same moment. It would close in pieces, and a thing that arrives in pieces can be met in pieces. Brannick did not wait for the shell to form. She met the fleets on the roads. The first to arrive was the Tessine Squadron, 210 warships racing in from the Rimward holdings, and they came out of fold at the Vale Junction, expecting to join a wall, and found instead 38 gray ships waiting in the dark, exactly where the junction's geometry forced them to emerge. Brannick had read the fold charts the same way she read everything, looking for the place the enemy could not help but be, and the Vale Junction was that place. 210 ships came out of fold, disoriented and unformed, the way ships always are in the first seconds after a deep fold, and the ninth was already formed and already firing. It should not have worked. 38 against 210 was worse math than anything the fleet had faced yet. But the Tessine Squadron came through in a stream, not a wall, 10 ships, then 20, then 40, each clump emerging into the same killing point, and the ninth did not fight 210 ships. It fought the same 20 ships over and over as they arrived, killing each clump before the next could form on it, and the Weave, racing home in a panic, fed its own fleet into the grinder one fold clump at a time because it could not bear to slow down. The whole squadron was wreckage in 40 minutes, and the ninth lost not one hull, because Brannick had turned the Weave's fear into a schedule the way Vance had turned its coordination into a noose. The second fleet learned from the first, because the Weave shared everything, and it came in a tighter formation, and it lasted longer, and it died anyway, because the thing the Weave shared was the memory of dying, and the memory of dying does not make a frightened mind braver. It makes it more afraid. Every fleet the Concordance threw at the gray ships on the roads to the core arrived carrying the felt memory of every fleet that had died before it, 10,000 minds reliving each loss, and the ninth fought an enemy that was drowning in its own shared terror, an enemy that flinched in the same instant across every hull because they all flinched together, and a fleet that flinches as one is a fleet that dies as one. This was the thing no single-minded power had ever had to face, and the Concordance faced it now in full. Its greatest strength, the sharing, the unity, the instant unanimous knowing, became under sustained loss its greatest weakness, because there was no separate mind anywhere in 1,100 ships to hold the line when the shared feeling was fear. A human fleet under the same losses would have had captains who steadied each other, who carried their own dread alone and did not pass it on, who could be brave separately even when the fleet as a whole was breaking. The Weave had none of that. It had only itself, 10,000 times over, and when itself was afraid, all of it was afraid, with no firewall anywhere to stop the fear from becoming everything. Brannick met 4 fleets on the roads to the core and broke all 4, and she did it without losing a single additional ship, because the wreckage of the great shell the Weave never managed to form lay scattered across 4-fold junctions, 800 ships that had been recalled in a panic and fed into the grinder in pieces. By the time the ninth reached the mined corridor that was the last road in, the 1,100 ships of the recall had become 300, the 300 that the Weave had finally, too late, managed to ring around the core in the deep defensive shell. That was the shell the Thresher would eat the mines to reach. 300 ships, not 1,100, because the Weave's own fear had thrown the other 800 away on the roads, one fold clump at a time, into the patient, separate, unflinching guns of 38 gray ships that had never once arrived in a panic because the ninth did not feel things as one, and so could not be stampeded as one. Brannick stood at the long table and looked at the broken recall. 800 ships turned to wreckage on 4 roads, and she did not feel triumph. She felt the weight of it, all of it, the way a separate mind feels the things it has done, alone. She had killed 800 ships and the crews inside them, and she would carry every one, and she had chosen to, because the alternative was 41 worlds made quiet, and a galaxy that learned the lever worked. She set her hand on the table where the last road waited. They threw their own fleet away trying to get home in time, she said quietly to Vance, on the net from the Black Verdict. 800 ships, gone, because a single mind in a panic can't do anything by halves. They couldn't stagger the recall. They couldn't bear to slow down. She was quiet for a moment. That's the whole war, Ito. They can only ever be one thing at a time, and we can be 46. 42 now, Vance said, the two lost in the deep fold to Cassandra's reach. The two more the roads had cost, despite everything. 42, Brannick agreed. She did not forget the 4. The 9th never forgot. 42, against 300 and a wall of mines, and a council that still thinks we're soft. Something that was not a smile touched her face. Let's go finish teaching them. The mined corridor to the core was 40 light minutes of dark, seeded with 8,000-fold mines, and the weave was certain it could not be crossed. The mines were not crude things. The concordance did nothing crude. Each one was a knot of folded space that would tear a ship apart the instant it tried to pass, and they were strung across every fold corridor that led to the core in a lattice as dense and as perfect as the lattice of mines that had laid them. The weave had calculated, in its single instant of shared thought, that any fleet entering the corridor would lose 9 ships in 10 before it reached the shell, and that the 300 warships of the shell would finish whatever crawled out the far side. The math was sound. The weave did not make math errors. It made one error, and it was the same error it had made from the beginning. It assumed the 9th would solve the problem the way a sane mind solved problems, by going around, by going slow, by minimizing loss. The 9th went straight through, and it did not go slow, and it did not minimize loss, and the weave had no model for what that meant, because no force in 40,000 years had ever been willing to pay the price the 9th was about to pay. Brannick put the thresher at the front, not in the protected center where doctrine and sense and the simple value of a flagship all said the command ship belonged. At the front, because the fold mines were triggered by the first ship through, and the first ship through would take the worst of it, and Brannick was not going to ask a single one of her 45 other captains to do a thing she would not do first. The thresher entered the mined corridor at full burn, and the mines began to fire, and the great gray ship took wounds that would have ended any other vessel in the galaxy, and did not stop, because the 9th's hulls had not been built to be beautiful. They had been built to be the last thing something saw, and that meant they had been built to keep going long after a beautiful ship would have died. The thresher's job in the corridor was not to survive. Brannick had told her crew this in the plainest words she had. The thresher's job was to be the ship that ate the mines, to drive through the lattice of folded space and trigger it and absorb it so that the ships behind it could pass through the gaps it tore open with its own body. It was the cruelest job in the fleet, and Brannick had given it to herself, and her crew had not argued, because they were the 9th, and they had signed papers in the dark beyond Neptune that said they would do exactly this. The thresher carved a road through 8,000 fold mines with its own hull, and behind it, the 45 other ships of the 9th poured through the road it tore, and the corridor that was supposed to kill 9 ships in 10 killed 4 ships in 46, because one ship had been willing to do a thing the weave could not imagine and had eaten the death meant for 40. The thresher came out the far side of the corridor with a third of its hull gone and its bridge venting atmosphere, and Cale Brannick still standing at its center, bleeding from a gash above her eye, and she looked at the shell of 300 Concordance warships ringed around the core, and she did not slow down. 9th, she said, and her voice carried across 42 surviving gray hulls. There it is, everything they have left, 300 ships and a wall of fear, and a council behind it that signed our names in gold. She wiped the blood out of her eye. We are going to go through them, and then we are going to go into the atrium, and we are going to finish what they started, except we are going to finish it on the people who started it, and not on a single farmer or child anywhere in this whole rotten concordance. Mark your targets. Hulls and the council. Nothing else. We are not them. That last order mattered more than anything else she said, and every captain in the 9th heard it and understood it, because it was the line between what they were doing and what the concordance had done. The weave had aimed at cities, the 9th aimed only at ships and at the chamber where the deciding happened. There were 360 concordance worlds in the dark around them, 360 worlds full of people who had felt the decision to murder humanity arrive in their skulls as their own idea and had been unable to refuse it, because that was what the Weave did to them, and the Ninth would not put a single shot on one of those worlds. The Ninth had come for the Council, not the conquered. That distinction was the whole soul of the thing, and the survivors would remember it as clearly as they remembered the guns. 42 gray ships hit 300 Concordance warships, and the last great battle of the war began, and it was not like Cassandra's Reach, and it was not like Corin's Landing, because here the Weave had decided to be afraid, and a unified mind that has decided to be afraid fights with everything at once and nothing in reserve. 300 ships turned on 42 together, the last coordinated movement the Concordance would ever make, a single will, wearing 300 bodies, and for one moment it looked like even the Ninth could not survive it. The shell closed around the gray ships like a fist closing around a coal. And the coal burned through the fist. The Weave's great strength was the noose Brannick had spent 9 years tying. 300 ships that moved as one moved into each other's fire when the Ninth split their attention 42 ways at once. 42 human captains made 42 different impossible choices in the same half-second, and the Weave, which could only make one choice at a time across all 300 of its bodies, could not answer 42 threats coming from 42 directions with one decision. It tried. It turned the whole shell to face the thresher, and the black verdict drove through the gap the turn opened. It turned to face the black verdict, and 12 gray ships poured through the new gap. Every time the single mind moved its 300 bodies to answer one blade, 41 other blades found the place the bodies had just left. The Weave was a wall, and a wall has no answer to 42 different fires, and the wall began to come apart. It came apart slowly at first, and then all at once. The survivors on the Concordance worlds, the ones who could feel the lattice, said that the last hour of the battle was the worst thing any of them had ever lived through, because they felt every ship die. For 40,000 years the Weave had spread the small losses of war across 10,000 minds so thin that no single mind ever felt a death. Now the deaths came too fast to spread, 300 ships dying in an hour, and the lattice could not absorb it, and 10,000 joined minds felt every single deletion as if it were happening to them. An hour of dying that did not stop, an hour in which the Concordance learned, finally and completely, what it had spent 40,000 years arranging never to feel. It learned what it had done to 41 human worlds in the span of an afternoon, because now it was happening to the Weave, and there was no separate mind anywhere in the lattice to look away. Brannick did not enjoy it. This is the thing the survivors got wrong, in the years after, when they told the story as a tale of human vengeance. She did not enjoy a single second of it. She stood on the broken bridge of the thresher with blood drying on her face, and she watched 300 ships die, and she felt the weight of every one settle onto her, because she was a separate mind, because she could not share the cost with anyone, because she would carry all of it alone for the rest of her life, and she had chosen this knowing that. That was the difference the Weave never understood. The Ninth did not feel less than the Concordance. It felt more, and it acted anyway, and it carried the weight alone, and that was not weakness, it was the most dangerous strength in the galaxy. The shell broke. 300 ships became wreckage in the dark around the core, and 42 gray ships became 38, 4 more names to carry, and the road to the Atrium Concordant lay open at last. They held Ren Holloway in a white cell beneath the atrium, and for the days the war lasted, the Weave came to him. Not in person, the Weave did not need a body to be present. It spoke to him through a pale lattice attendant, whose eyes had the flat shared look of a creature that had never once been alone in its own skull, and through that attendant, the council itself spoke, 10,000 minds wearing one mouth, because the Weave wanted to understand the thing it had failed to read, and Holloway was the only walled-off human mind it had left in its hands. It questioned him the way a scientist questions a specimen. It wanted to know why the gray ships did not turn back. It wanted to know how a soft species could pay the prices it was paying. It wanted to know what was behind the wall in the human mind that 4 years of survey had never opened, and it believed, with the unanimous certainty of a thing, that had never been wrong in 40,000 years, that a frightened man in a cell would give it the answer. Holloway was a frightened man. He had always been a frightened man. He was frightened now, in the white cell, with the deaths of the prisoners before him counted out one each hour, knowing his own hour would come. But somewhere on the road out of the atrium 4 years and a lifetime ago, the fear had run all the way through him and out the other side, and what was left behind it was the cold, clear thing, and the cold, clear thing did not answer the Weave's questions. "You can't read it," he told the pale attendant, on the second day, "because there's nothing to read. There's no trick behind the wall. There's no secret weapon. You keep looking for the thing that makes us able to do this, and there isn't a thing. There's just us, deciding, one at a time, separately, that some prices are worth paying. You can't feel that because you've never once been alone long enough to decide anything by yourself." He almost laughed. "You've been one mind for 40,000 years, and you still don't know what a person is." The Weave did not understand him. It recorded the answer and ran it through 10,000 minds at once, and found no purchase in it, because the thing he was describing was the one thing the Weave had no organ to feel, a choice made alone, a cost carried alone, a self that was only itself and answered only to itself, and could decide, in the privacy the Weave had never had, to do the hardest thing in the galaxy and tell no one and flinch from none of it. On the third day the Weave told him about the lever. It told him, in the flat voice of 10,000 minds, that it would use him, that it would put his face on every band and kill him in front of the fleet his warning had built, and that this would break the gray ships, because the gray ships valued him, because humans were soft and could not bear the cost of a man dying to make them turn around. And Holloway, in the white cell, with his own death now named and scheduled, felt the cold, clear thing settle over him completely, and he understood the gift the Weave had just handed him without knowing it. It had told him he would have last words. It had told him the whole fleet would hear them. He spent the last day of his life deciding what to say, not how to beg, because he had decided long ago that whatever else he did, he would not give the Weave the begging it was certain it would get. He spent the day instead making himself ready to give the fleet the one thing he could still give it, which was permission to win without grieving him first. The Weave made its last calculation then, and it was the calculation of a mind that had finally, completely understood that it was going to lose, and the calculation was the murder of the prisoners. It had killed 9 of the 100 already, 1 each hour, beginning with the threat, and continuing because the Weave did not bluff. Holloway had not been first after all. The Weave, in its cold, flat, unanimous certainty, had saved Holloway, the man who started it, for last, because it had calculated that the human fleet would value him most, and that his death, broadcast to the gray ships at the moment of their victory, would be the cruelest possible answer to their refusal to turn back. It would not save the Concordance. The Weave understood that now. But it would make the humans pay, and a unified mind that has decided to be afraid will do anything to make the thing it fears hurt, even if hurting it changes nothing. The Weave broadcast Holloway to the incoming fleet. It put his face on every band, the liaison who had carried the pin, the witness it should have silenced, kneeling in a Concordance holding cell with a pale lattice guard beside him, and it spoke to the 9th in the flat voice of Vorn Sa, and it said, "Watch." Brannick watched. She made herself watch, because she would not look away from a cost she could not stop. The thresher was 40 minutes from the atrium. There was no fold that could cross 40 minutes in time. The math was simple and cruel, and there was no answer in it. And Ren Holloway, kneeling in the cell, looked up at the recording eye with the very last of the cold, clear thing that had carried him out of the atrium 4 years and a lifetime ago, and he did the bravest thing a coward ever did. He looked into the eye, knowing the fleet was watching, knowing these were his last words, and he did not beg. "Don't you dare turn back," he said. "Don't you dare. Finish it." He almost smiled. "I carried the pin. Let me have carried it for something." The Weave killed him then, on every band, in front of the fleet his warning had built, certain it had delivered the cruelest possible blow. It had not understood, even now, even at the very end, what it had done. It had taken a coward and shown the whole galaxy that he died unafraid and unbowed, telling the gray ships to finish it. It had not broken the ninth. It had given the ninth a martyr and a final order in the same breath, and the order was the one the ninth had already chosen, spoken now by the man the weave had murdered to try to stop it. Brannock stood on the broken bridge of the Thresher, and she did not weep, though she would later, for years. She keyed the fleet net one last time, and her voice was very quiet and very cold. "You heard him," she said. "We finish it." 38 gray ships turned their bows toward the Atrium Concordant, toward the chamber built for 9,000 delegates, toward the council that had signed Earth's name in gold, and then sent 400 ships to kill its children, and then murdered 100 prisoners to try to make the gray ships turn back, and the Ninth Fleet, which had never turned back, which had never failed, which had never lost, drove down the open road toward the place where the deciding happened, to make certain that it would never happen again. The Atrium Concordant had stood for 40,000 years, and in 40,000 years no weapon had ever been fired inside it, and Vorn Sa had 90 years of certainty that none ever would. The certainty was gone now. The speaker stood at the center of the great dome, where 10,000 delegates were joined into a single screaming silent will, and for the first time in its long life, it felt what the human prisoners must have felt in their cells, what the people of Harrogate must have felt in the 9 seconds before the strike, what every soul on every world the Concordance had ever made quiet must have felt. It felt the thing coming that could not be stopped, and it felt it alone, even joined to 10,000 minds, because all 10,000 felt exactly the same, and there was no one anywhere in the lattice to say it would be all right. The ninth came out of the last fold above the core world, 38 gray ships, scarred and bleeding and slowed by their wounds, and below them lay the heart of the Concordance, the world where the Council met, a world the Weave had ringed with the deepest defenses it owned and had still not made safe, because the thing about a fortress is that it only matters until something is willing to pay the price of the door. The ninth was willing. The ninth had been willing from the dark beyond Neptune. That was the whole of it, in the end. Not better ships, though the ships were terrible. Not better tactics, though Brannock outthought a 40,000-year mind. The single fact the Weave could never model was that the ninth had decided, before it ever left home, exactly what it would pay, and it never once flinched from the bill. Brannock brought the Thresher down over the Atrium Concordant, and the great gray ship hung in the sky above the dome, ruined and unstoppable, and she opened a channel to Vorn Sa, the first and only words she would ever speak to the council that had betrayed her people. "Speaker," she said, "I am Admiral Cale Brannock of the Ninth Fleet of Earth. You signed our names in gold and called it Alliance, and you used the Alliance to learn where our children slept, and then you sent 400 ships to make them quiet. You murdered 100 of our people to try to make us turn around." She paused. "We did not turn around. We are never going to turn around, and I want you to understand, before this ends, that the only thing standing in the dark above your council right now is what you made when you decided that a species that would not join you was a thing to be deleted." Vorn Sa answered, and its flat voice carried the unanimous terror of 10,000 minds. "You will not fire on the Atrium," it said. "It has stood for 40,000 years. You are a soft species. You cannot do the cold thing." And Brannock understood, in that moment, that the Weave still did not understand, even now, even with 38 gray ships hanging over its throat. It still believed the survey. It still believed humans could not bear the cost. It had watched the ninth eat 8,000 minds with one ship's body. It had watched 20 hulls hold a sky against 400. It had murdered a man and watched him die telling the fleet to finish it. And it still believed, in the last second of its long life, that humans were soft. That was the thing the Weave had never grasped about the wall it could not join. The wall was not softness. The wall was the place where humans kept the cold thing, the thing they did not share, the thing they could do when the worst came and would not flinch from doing. The Weave had spent 4 years studying the human mind, and had never once seen the part that mattered, because the part that mattered was exactly the part the human mind would not let it see. "You're right, that the atrium has stood for 40,000 years, Brannick said, "and you're wrong about everything else." She did not fire on the dome. That mattered, and it mattered for the rest of the history that 9 species would write about that day. The 9th had aimed only at hulls and at the Council, and the Council was not the dome, and was not the world, and was not the 360 conquered peoples who had felt the murder of humanity arrive in their skulls as their own idea. The Council was 10,000 delegates and the weave that joined them, and the weave lived in a lattice, a vast physical engine buried beneath the atrium that held 10,000 minds in their terrible unity, and Brannick had spent the entire war learning exactly where it was. The Thresher fired on the lattice. One shot, the cold, clean human kind of shot that went through instead of splashing. It punched down through the floor of the atrium and into the engine that had joined 10,000 minds into one will for 40,000 years, and it unmated. What happened next, the survivors could never fully describe, because to describe it, you had to have been inside the weave when it ended, and the ones who had been inside the weave when it ended spent the rest of their lives learning how to be alone. The lattice broke, and 10,000 minds that had not been separate in 40,000 years became separate all at once. The single will of the concordance, the unanimous instant certainty that had decided to murder humanity and had felt it as its own idea, simply ceased to be, because there was no longer an engine to hold it together. 10,000 delegates who had never once in their lives had a thought that was only their own, suddenly had nothing but their own thoughts, alone in their own skulls for the first time, and many of them could not bear it, and the dome filled with a sound the recording eyes captured, and the survivors asked to have erased, the sound of a collective mind dying into 10,000 separate griefs. And in that sound, the thing the weave had done finally landed on the ones who had done it, because now they were separate. Now each of the 10,000 had to feel, alone, in a single mind that could no longer share the weight, exactly what they had voted to do to 41 human worlds. The decision they had felt as their own idea was now, truly, each of theirs to carry, alone, the way Brannick carried her dead alone, the way every separate mind in the galaxy carried its choices alone. The weave had spent 40,000 years, arranging never to feel the cost of anything. The 9th had ended the war by handing each member of the Council the entire cost at once, and making them carry it the only way the rest of the galaxy ever had, alone. Vorn Sa did not survive the breaking. The speaker had carried the weave's voice for 90 years, and had been more woven into the lattice than any other mind, and when the lattice ended, so did it. The survivors said this was a mercy, though they did not agree on whose. The Council was gone, not the dome which still stood, not the world which still turned. Not the 360 conquered peoples, who woke that day to find that the will that had ruled them for 40,000 years had ended, and that the gray ships in their sky had not fired a single shot on any of them, and that they were, for the first time in their long history, free and alone and able to choose. The 9th had left them every one of those choices. It had left nothing of the thing that had taken those choices away. That was what the title of the war would mean. In the end, when 9 species wrote it down, Earth's fleet had arrived, and it had left nothing standing, not nothing of the concordance, nothing of the Council, nothing of the weave that had betrayed it. The thing that had signed Earth's name in gold and sent 400 ships to make its children quiet, that thing was gone, root and engine and unanimous will, and the gray ships had been surgical about it in a way no collective mind could ever have managed, because a collective mind could only aim one will at everything, and the 9th had aimed 38 separate, careful, terrible human minds at exactly the guilty and nothing else. Brannick held the thresher over the broken atrium for 1 hour. She was not waiting for a surrender. There was no longer any will left to surrender. She was waiting because there were 9 human prisoners' bodies in the holding cells below, and 91 living ones, and she did not leave until every one of the 91 living was aboard a gray ship and safe, and until the 9 dead, including a liaison named Ren Holloway who had carried the pen and died unafraid, were carried up out of the dark by human hands and given to the thresher to bring home. She came for him herself. She did not have to. An admiral does not have to walk into the holding cells of a broken enemy and lift a dead man's body with her own arms. But Brannick walked the silent halls of the atrium where 10,000 minds were learning to be alone, and she found the cell where the Weave had murdered Holloway in front of her fleet, and she lifted him, and she carried him up to the light, because the 9th left no one behind, not the living and not the dead, and because the man had carried the pen for something, and the something was standing all around him, free. On Hadar's wheel, the clerk named Osa Lin lived to be old, and she remembered the day the Weave ended for the rest of her long life. She remembered the silence first. For her whole life, there had been a low, warm hum at the back of every thought, the presence of 10,000 other minds, the Weave holding her the way water holds a fish, so close and so constant that she had never known it was there until it was gone. When the gray ship's single shot unmade the lattice beneath the atrium, the hum stopped, everywhere, all at once, and for the first terrible moment Osa Lin thought she had died, because she had never once been alone inside her own skull, and she did not know that being alone was a thing a person could survive. She survived it. They all did, the ones who chose to. And in the silence where the Weave had been, Osa Lin discovered the thing the gray ships had carried all the way from the dark beyond Neptune without ever setting foot on her world. She discovered that she had a self, and that the self was hers, and that no one would ever again reach into her skull and hand her a decision and make her feel it as her own idea. Her world did not fall into ruin, the way the Weave had always promised it would if the unity ever broke. It chose. For the first time in 40,000 years, the people of Hadar's wheel sat down together as separate minds, 10 trillion separate minds across 360 freed worlds, and they argued, and they disagreed, and they built something out of the disagreeing that the Weave could never have built, because the Weave could only ever build the one thing it had already decided. They built a galaxy with more than one answer in it. The gray ships never came back to Hadar's wheel. They had no reason to. They had never fired on it, never threatened it, never asked it for anything. They had simply ended the thing that ruled it, and left every choice that thing had stolen lying on the ground for the freed to pick up. Osa Lin grew old in a free world, and when the young asked her about the war, she told them the part the histories of 9 species would always get a little wrong. She told them that the gray ships had not come to conquer, and had not come to rule, and had not even, in the end, come for revenge, though revenge was what the title said. She told them the gray ships had come because a council signed a soft species name in gold and reached past the wall in its mind to murder its children, and that the wall, the part the Weave could never read, had turned out to hold the strongest thing in the galaxy, not cruelty, the cold, clear thing, the willingness of a single separate mind to carry the whole cost alone and never flinch. And then she would tell them the last part, the part she had felt herself, in the silence on the day the Weave ended. She would tell them that the gray ships had left her world the greatest gift one people had ever given another, and had not even known they were giving it, and had asked for nothing in return. They had left her alone inside her own mind. And alone, at last, she had been free. The 9th Fleet folded out of the Concordance Corps that day, 38 gray ships of the original 48, 10 names to carry home and add to a wall in the dark beyond Neptune. Behind it lay 360 worlds that had been conquered and were now free, 10,000 delegates learning the weight of their own choices, and a broken dome where a council had once decided things and felt them as truth. Ahead lay 41 human worlds, 40 of them whole, one of them scarred forever by 60,000 dead at Harrogate, and on all 41 of them, people who would never again be told that humans were soft. The Weave's last calculation had been right about one thing. It had calculated that the gray ships would value Holloway most. It was correct. The 9th named its next ship after him, the first of a new generation built to replace the 10 that did not come home, and the ship carried his name across its gray flank in letters 10 meters tall, and it went into the same dark drawer beyond Neptune to wait, the way the ninth always waited, for the next time a signatory decided that humans were a thing that could be betrayed. There was no next time. This is the part of the history that the survivors found hardest to believe. In the years after, and it is the truest part. In the 40,000 years the Concordance had ruled, dozens of species had been made quiet, and not one of them had ever made the galaxy pause. The breaking of the weave made the galaxy pause for a very long time, because every species that learned what had happened at the Atrium Concordant learned it the same way, as a single story with a single shape, and the shape was this. A great power signed Earth's name in gold and called it friendship, and used the friendship to find where Earth's children slept, and sent 400 ships to make them quiet, certain that a soft species could be betrayed without cost. And 48 gray ships came out of the dark, and they did not fire on a single world that had been conquered, and they did not fire on a single soul that had not chosen the crime, and they aimed only at the guilty, and they were surgical and patient and unstoppable, and they paid every price the war asked without flinching once, and when they were finished, the power that had betrayed Earth was gone, root and will and counsel, and nothing of it remained standing at all. The lesson the galaxy took from it was not that humans were monsters. The careful, surgical, prisoner-carrying, conquered-sparing shape of the war made certain of that. The lesson the galaxy took from it was far more useful, and it kept the peace for longer than any treaty ever had. The lesson was this: you may trade with Earth, you may ally with Earth, you may stand beside Earth in any war the galaxy throws at either of you, and Earth will hold the line beside you and carry your dead home with its own. But you may not betray Earth, because there is a thing Earth keeps in the dark, a thing it does not talk about, a thing that sleeps in a drawer beyond a cold planet and waits, and it has read the worst math there is to read, and it has already decided what it will pay, and if you sign Earth's name in gold and then reach for its children, that thing will wake, and it will come, and it will leave nothing of you standing at all. Cale Brannock lived another 30 years. She never commanded the Ninth in war again, because there was no war to command it in, because no one ever tried. She carried her dead alone, the way separate minds do, and she visited the wall in the dark beyond Neptune where the 10 names were, and one of them was a coward who had carried the pen and died telling the fleet to finish it, and she stood in front of his name longer than any of the others, because he had taught her the thing she most needed to know, and had taught it to her in the last words of his life. He had taught her that the wall the weave could not join, the secret part of the human mind it had spent 4 years failing to read, was not where humans kept their cruelty. It was where they kept the cold, clear thing that let a frightened man look into a killing eye and tell his people not to dare turn back. It was where they kept the strength to carry a cost alone and act anyway. The weave had thought it was a weakness, a flaw, a place where lies could hide. It was the strongest thing in the galaxy, and the Concordance had reached past it to grab Earth's children, and it had never once understood that the wall was the only warning it would ever get. In the dark beyond Neptune, the new ship that carried Holloway's name powered down to a whisper and folded itself into the cold, and the Ninth Fleet went back to waiting, the way a loaded weapon waits in a locked drawer, the way you keep a thing you hope you will never need. And across 360 freed worlds and 41 human ones, and every star in between, the galaxy remembered and was careful and let Earth's children sleep. Nothing remained of the ones who had not.